That matter.
No,
All right.
Also, I bet you.
anything slip on. So nice.
That looks interesting.
Okay, so one of the things when I talk about a topic, I always like to see what's current on Hotline. And there were like 8, of which I thought 3, maybe 4 were interesting. So I also have a question into Annie Fitzsimmons. And I'm very disappointed because she didn't have a 24-hour turnaround.
Shame on her.
And as soon as we get a response, then I'll send that out to everybody on the list so that you can see. So this last week, Kara and Lauren had a seller finance situation, and they had a brand new form that I've never seen or used. I didn't even know it was there. And so in the meantime, I've done as much research as I can and to be able to find it. So what I want to do is just kind of go through the hotline questions, then go through 22C, and then go through that new form and how do we fill it out and what does it look like and stuff like that. And when do you use it? Because you don't use it always. So let's start then with this first one. The broker had a seller that wanted to retain the title until the money was, till it was completely paid off. And so that is in essence a real estate contract. So this guy over the years had probably done quite a few, and he called it the land contract, which is an old, outdated one. And he wanted to use that instead of an LPB 44. And I'll show you where it shows you which form you use, whether it's a note and deed of trust or if it's a real estate contract. One of the things that they went through is their question was, what do I do when I have somebody like that? And Vanessa left. Maybe I'll come back to this when she's in here. Escrow officers have a license that's called LPO, and they're licensed practitioners. And they are the ones that when we have a seller finance, that they're the ones that work with their attorney on contract to fill out the forms for seller finance. And so if you have questions about seller finance and the forms and things like that, escrow is a really good resource. Of course, we have our own escrow queen right here in the office with Vanessa. Has anybody ever asked Vanessa a question? Yeah, good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So she's a wonderful resource. If you ask me a question about escrow or seller financing in these forms, I will probably tell you to go see her. Let me see. So anyways, this broker wanted to be able to say, what can I tell this guy? Other than, come on, dude. Okay. So an escrow officer is licensed to use and complete the LBO forms, but cannot complete other forms. So that's our first conversation with somebody that wants to use something else. If the form the seller wants to use is not that our forms, and they come from they are licensed by the state, literally by the Supreme Court. I mean, it's a pretty big deal. Escrow and broker are both relieved of liability because what we're going to say is then you need to have your attorney fill it out, and then the buyer, if they have their attorney review it, and then that takes all the liability from the escrow officer and from us. So they are licensed practitioners. And if you want to talk about this, Vanessa, please step right in. They wanted to use a different form than the LPB forms. And so this was a hotline question, and Annie said, the answer is, you're licensed to use those forms that are sanctioned by the state, correct?
Right.
And if you want to do anything else, they need to go to an attorney and get it done.
Yes, so we can complete the LPB forms, and if you go onto, you just go, anybody can go to the limited practice website and see the list of forms, and they're all LPB forms.
And this is the site, it's wsba.org.
Mhm.
And then it has hyphens between the words. For legal professionals, join the legal profession in Washington, limited practice officers.
So yeah, limited practice officers, which I am one, and usually most professional escrow people that are invested in their professions will have this designation. It's a kind of a fairly complicated test you have to take, but you get a bar association number for that. So I call it my bar card. I have a bar card.
That's great.
Gives me every bar in Washington now.
So I'll include this link.
Yeah.
And it used to be that we could get to it through Northwest MLS, but I don't know what they've done with their connection. I have to go back and find it. I always just go here. And if you look at this, section 1 is about mortgage. We don't care about that. Escrow documentation, and that's why our escrow person is the one. And then if you notice here, and I might as well, it will be another question. But if you notice, like if we're going to do a real estate contract, it's 44. And you notice they have 05, and then they have an I, and then they have an R. And we'll talk about what is the difference between these two forms. But this is what the website looks like. If you use 22C and you're going to do a deed and note there, you're not going to do a real estate contract, but you're going to do a note and deed of trust. Then it will be 28A is a promissory note. And this other new form that I've never seen before, you can use that as well. And then it goes to 22A for the actual contract. Okay, so this is the website, and it's how I found this is I just put LPB forms, and then it leads me to LPO forms, and it's the Washington State Bar Association. Okay.
But Marsha, don't realtors have a best practices recommendation of which documents to use for each situation?
It depends. It's in our form, and we'll go over that in just a second. Okay, good question. Okay, and in Zoomland, just if you have a question, I don't always see it. I have 22 eyes here that will help me see it, but go ahead and just unmute yourself and ask a question, because we can hear you really well. Okay, so here's the question about the difference of 22A R and the I. And they just wanted to know what the difference is. LPO forms are made available by the Washington State Bar Association for use by escrow people, which are licensed limited practice officers. So they're licensed by the Supreme Court, which I thought was really cool. So if you don't already treat your escrow person as somebody very special, you really need to, because they're really do a lot of interesting things. So right down here, it refers to the whether it's an individual or it's going to be a corporation. Oh, here we are. The significance of whether the form includes an I or an R is that the forms with an I have a signature line and a notary block signing by an individual. So if it's just a person doing it. Forms that have an R have a signature and notary block for signing by a person on behalf of an entity, corporations, partnerships, or LLC. I never knew that until I started to research. And I think we presented this about 3 or 4 times. So I really appreciate the hotline. I think I like to look through that to see what questions were asked in the last week and see what's trending out there. If a broker is writing a seller finance offer and attaching a sample deed of trust for buyer to sign, the broker will select the deed of trust with an I in the number if the buyer is an individual or a married couple or a group of individuals. However, the broker will select a R with a number if it's an entity rather than an individual. So, okay, the language is basically the same. Oh.
So often,
They will attach the incorrect one.
Mhm.
But like that said in that, you highlighted it, we select the correct one.
Yes.
And we're not gonna come back and make you reattach the other one.
Mhm.
The language is the same, it's just the notary block that's different.
And see, before we do a ton of seller. I never knew the difference. I just clicked on the first one. That's how you get to be a managing broker, guys. Fake it till you make it.
Or select C. C is often correct as well. Statistically.
So one of the things your 22C will ask is the second topic. The first one is going to be used as a residence, and we'll talk about that. And the second one is a DFI waiver. So I thought this is important. And what's the penalty? You know, this really doesn't say what the penalty is. If it's land, and the way that I look at it, will it or will it not? Let's say I'm buying a lot and it's going to be my residence, but I'm not going to go out Monday morning and get a change of address for all my mail to go there. It's not ready to be a residence yet. So I will use the will not. If you are using seller financing on a house, then you will check the will. And the reason for that is because they want to make sure that the people who are doing the seller financing aren't writing a whole bunch of deals. It's a very easy process to go to the state and get a DFI waiver. If you're selling a house and it's seller financing, then you need to make sure that your buyer is protected and the seller gets that waiver. So that's something we can come back and say, I've never called the listing and said, gee, did your seller get a DFI waiver? They would probably say, what? They haven't been drinking and driving. Okay. So it's really easy to do, and right on the Form 22 that we'll see here in a second, it tells you where to go and how to find it. Okay.
Department of Financial Institutions.
Yeah. All right. So, but it is up, if you're on the listing side, it is up to the seller to get the waiver if you're doing a home. Let's say they have just a regular listing, and then your people come back and say, with 50% down, would the seller be interested in doing the seller finance? Then as a listing broker, we need to know what's the difference between a note and deed of trust and a real estate contract. And you then will have to find out from your seller if they've sold anything. And when we get into the 22C, it kind of gives you a list. I thought this one was really good because, Erin, was it you or was it somebody was going to do a lot seller financing and they were going to do a lot of remodeling. And so I thought, Yeah, that could work. So on Form 22C, the seller financing form, buyer has to do substantial remodeling to a house they're buying. This may include roof, sheetrock, flooring, bathroom repair. Should 94 alterations be checked or not checked? So that is a conversation that you have with your seller. If you know that your buyer is going to be doing a lot of things, then you don't want to check that box. But if you don't want them to do a lot of changes, maybe they gut everything out and then they fall out of the deal and you end up with a house that's all gutted. I mean, you you really have a conversation about them, whether or not, who's going to do it. Is the buyer capable? Are they having a contractor? Are they in a contractor family? Let's really talk about it. If that provision is marked, that means that alteration provision on the real estate contract used to secure the seller finance will be initialed by the parties. If that provision is initial, that means the buyer will be prohibited from making substantial alterations without prior consent of the seller. If this is the goal of the parties, allow the buyer to make the alterations to the property without requiring the seller's consent, then the alterations box on line 94, 22C should not be marked. Liability, yeah, you're having a huge liability there. Okay, so if we look at Form 22C, the top part, I think everybody will get. And number one, when we talk about will or will not, if it's vacant land, then the seller does not have to get a DFI waiver. Which is a good thing because I didn't know if they did or didn't. However, there are some things in here that we need to look at. If the property is used for a residential dwelling, seller shall either obtain a waiver, and you go to the Washington State Department of Financial Institutions, DFI, or identify an exemption from the licensing requirements under RCW 3104. So if the seller does not give notice to the buyer that the seller has either obtained the waiver or identified an exemption, then within 5 days of mutual acceptance, buyer may terminate the agreement at any time prior to seller giving such notice. If seller is not exempt and does not grant a DFI waiver, seller may terminate the agreement within 5 days or however many days. So, this is an important part because we're acting in the limited capacity as an attorney. We need to know our form and we need to know and understand this. So if you're representing a seller and you're going to talk with them about seller financing, then they really need to understand if it's a house, especially. And up above, if it's going to be used, then for a resident, this addendum may only be used if the seller is a natural person and not a loan originator, estate, or a trust. So if the property is in an estate, it can't be seller financing. Okay. Seller has not financed the sale of another property within the last 12 months. I have worked with sellers that have done more than one property in 12 months, but they got the DFI waiver. This will not stop them, but they for sure, if they've done that on another property, then they need to make sure that they can get that waiver. The seller did not construct or act as a contractor for the construction of a residence on the property in the ordinary course of the seller's business. So if you're a contractor and you're building spec homes, then what this is saying is that you're not eligible to be a seller finance. Now, if they sell it from one business to the other, they can get away. The repayment schedule does not result in a negative amortization, and this is where the state is looking out for the buyer. Can you imagine being in your house for like 4 years and you're making a $2,200 payment and you find out at the end of 4 years you owe more than when you originally started? That's a negative amortization. And so that's what the state is really helping to protect the buyers with. Or the last reason, the financing has a fixed interest rate or an adjustable rate of interest that is adjustable after 5 or more years. So they can do that. And if you're going to do like a 10-year balloon, you can say, okay, this first 5 years, we're going to do it at 7%. But at 5 years, then we can look at it and it's either going to go up or down depending on the interest rate or however you structure it or they structure it. And that is something that an attorney really needs to get involved in. Okay. Any questions on the limited use or the DFI exemption? Okay. Disclosure. If the property will be used for a residential dwelling, seller may provide buyer with a residential disclosure summary prescribed by DFI or a compliant federal disclosure under Regulation Z that includes the material terms and condition of the loans. So what are those? Those are, what's the first thing that most people look at when you're doing seller financing or financing? What's the interest rate?
The rate, the down payment, the balloon payment.
What's the down payment? Is it amortized over 15 years, even though it's a 10-year balloon, or is it amortized over 30? What's the benefit of having it be amortized over 30 years, but maybe a 5-year balloon payment? What's the benefit to the buyer? A lower payment. What happens to the principal?
Not much.
Yeah, not much. So that's really not a bad deal for the seller. That's actually a very good deal for the seller, because except for if for some reason it really appreciated. But I don't think we're going to go into that over the next 5 years. Anyways, it's really important under all of those things that we were tested on when we got our license. You pretty much need to know what is the price, what is the interest, what are the payments going to be, how many years is it amortized over, and when is the payment due for the full amount, the balloon payment. I think in the last 2 weeks, I came across a seller finance where they got a 4% interest with 30 years. And it was like, wow.
Like not even a balloon payment.
No, that was it. It would just be amortized over 30 years, and that's, you pay it and you're, yeah.
Are you talking about the one I wrote?
No. No, if you want to, at any time, you can talk about the one you wrote.
The one I wrote had those terms, but it was a 5-year balloon,
Mhm.
amortized over 30 years,
Mhm.
5 years, and no prepayment penalty. So you could refinance it anytime.
So the contract, if you use a note and deed of trust or a real estate contract, they both have no prepayment penalty written into the contract.
So if we have, let's say, a balloon payment, so I'm trying to think, what is the best option for the buyer in your experience, guys? Or,
You mean how many years?
let's say that we have, 10-year, 15-year amortized and 5-year balloon payment,
I was going to say, if you're going to move into a house, I would do I would ask for a 5-year.
Okay, and we're using the note, right?
You're using a real estate contract.
Okay, because I'm working with a land deal.
Okay, land is different. Usually, on most land that I see, and what Russ was doing with our company before it was Keller Williams, was anywhere from a 2 to a 5 year balloon on land.
Yeah.
And then it was really up to the client. Do you want a lower payment, but the principal will almost be the same? Or, and then just make extra payments. And then you have to make sure with the seller that's gonna be okay. Because they, tax-wise, they may have a specific plan. And it's not that you can't not pay, but it's just, it's nice that the seller knows, oh, okay, so you plan to have this thing paid off in 5 years because you're making extra payments. And does everybody know, bankrate.com is one of our best places because we can sit down with a buyer or a seller and we can talk about, you can get the mortgage payments, but you can also click on another button and it will show you by making an extra $50 payment. What does that do to your principal? If you're making an extra $200 payment, that resource is really a wonderful resource. Bankrate.com.
I don't know if you know, but the longer you amortize, so if you amortize for 30 years, you're gonna owe more after 5 years than you would. So it's just, it kind of, like you said, the goal of that buyer, like to have more or less on the table at the end of 5 years, that balloon will. So if you want less on the table, then amortize shorter. You don't mind having more on the table after 5 years, then amortize longer.
On this land deal, what we did is, we tried to find a comfortable amount for the buyer, and we're doing a 5 year amortized with 2 year balloon. You know, and she feels everybody's okay with it, at a 5% rate, and,
What was their payments like?
it's gonna be without, it's gonna be around $2,000, between 1,900 and change.
Is that land?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Uh-huh.
That's a lot to do 5 year I don't, yeah.
I would always amortize if you're representing the buyer and the seller.
The buyer.
Amortize longer, that way the payments aren't as heavy, and then plan to refinance at the end of the year, end of the term. That way it's not a
Yeah,
stress
there's
on your
several
mind.
So another way to be able to couch that is, let's say the difference was maybe $1,000 a month by doing it by amortizing over 20 years instead of 5. Then you can say, if you have a couple of months that you can't make that $2,000 payment, then you have this $750 payment. But you can always pay $2,000, every month, because that goes directly right into your principal reduction.
Oh, I get it, so.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to push the sellers to amortize for longer, and that's gonna,
That part of it doesn't really matter to the sellers because it's the balloon. How long before they will get the rest of their payment?
And they're getting interest. off
Yes.
that. So
Exactly.
that's why it's beneficial to the seller if they can. They're making more than they're asking
but
price.
on the buyer side, it's lower payment, they give more, they pay more for the principal, right? Okay.
And that's just gonna, you pay more for the principal, however you finance it.
Yeah.
But this way it helps people who can't quite qualify, but they make the income, they can get in and start.
I see.
Yeah, so you're looking at attention too, because if they're building, a lot of times they're gonna get a construction loan in a couple of years.
And it pays everything off.
And that'll pay it off. So, yeah, so I agree with her that usually what I see is that they're trying to make the payment as low as possible for the buyer, but they always have the option to pay more.
Yeah.
So you're just making it easier for them to have options by making your amortization longer. If the seller will do it, and like you said, maybe the seller is not willing to amortize over that long length of time, but. Yeah, it just depends on the situation. They may be doing a construction loan in a couple of years and it won't matter.
I have a
It's
question.
the first thing. Okay, somebody has a question.
I do.
Okay, Sarah.
Somebody made a comment about the seller making more on interest, and I'm assuming that's over a longer amortization. Or did I not understand?
No, the interest is going to be, the interest is the percentage.
Yeah,
The amortization just talks about the percentage of what goes to pay interest and what goes to pay principal.
Yep.
Let me just show you real quick.
I understand that.
Oh, okay.
I just, somewhere, I thought I heard somebody say something about what length of amortization was more beneficial to the seller. Maybe I didn't understand.
Okay, so if you have monthly payments and like a brand new house loan, your first principal payments are really little and it's
Mhm.
all interest. And so that's the way it's going to be for the 3 to 5 years. That's pretty much, there isn't much that goes toward it. And so what they're saying is if you carry this as a seller for a balloon payment for 5 years, you're making interest off of your investment, which is that property.
That's what it was. Yeah.
And then, in 5 years, then the whole thing is paid off and then you're paid off.
Okay.
Okay, I've got this up now. I just want to show you if I can find it. Oh, right up here. Here's the payment breakdown. And when I do this, I always eliminate tax and homeowners insurance. And it's not letting me do that. Okay. So that it is just, when I do a 22C, it is just purely principal and interest. And so if you look here on the left side, you have your interest rates. Isn't that interesting? Right now they're showing 7.5%. Anyways, what this will do right here is it will help you figure out with the percentage or the dollar amount of their down payment, it will help you figure out what their payment, just principal and interest are. If we go over here and we take a look at it, it's a really cool graphic because it will tell you in 10 years, where are you at? And you notice that the interest rate drops and then your principal is rising. And then if you want to go down here and you want to, let's see, I have to eliminate you for just a tiny second, Sarah. Oh, I don't know what that is. I don't care about that. Nope. Oh,
I just quit because I don't know what it's talking about.
okay. So there is a place here where if you make additional payments, here's starting in September 23, and let's say you're going to make $250. Oops, that's too many zeros. $250 extra a month. And we just want to do that. Then you can come back and then you can show them what the difference is if they've made it or they don't make it.
So this is what I did on 2 houses is I did a 30-year loan, but I made the mortgage payment and then made a double amount strictly to the principal.
Right.
So I hit that first period really hard.
And then did you find, well, and for a buyer, that's really good because that means that the amount you're getting your interest rate applied to is shrinking.
Yeah.
Exponentially. Were you able to pay it off like in 10 or 15 years when you did that?
I kept one house for 7 years and sold it, and I'm in a house that I bought 4 years ago that I owe less than 100,000 on because of extra payment.
Yeah.
And if not everybody knows about recasting, ask Michael Maher and looked into that.
Okay, recasting. And what is that, just briefly?
So essentially, whoever's holding your mortgage would have their own certain criteria on if you can recast, which is like whether you pay 10% of your balance or a certain amount of money. So instead of refinancing, your interest rate stays the same, but you're putting a big chunk of money on your principal and it re-amortizes your loan, so your monthly payments are lower.
but you're not sacrificing your interest rate.
And that's called recasting.
Recasting.
Okay,
We did
did,
it on our house and our payment went down like $200 a month, and now we're like a 15-year instead of 30.
and
But you
it,
don't, yeah, because I'm never gonna want a different interest rate.
it's
You're gonna
amazing.
Save up money instead of just doing small
Yeah.
principal payments, like extra. You just do it at once and you don't have lender fees or like, it's like, I think theirs was $900 to like be able to do it. So, yeah, good stuff. So,
Oh, excellent. I have never heard of that, but that's
yeah, because
excellent.
I don't think lenders like to say it because they make no money.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
they're in the business
Great.
of making money. Yeah.
Mhm.
So any other questions on that?
Good question. And look how much we did. on that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. Okay, so this section E of a 22C is very important because you are in your limited scope as an attorney, you really want them to go and escrow has like an attorney on staff that they'll fill out the forms and then they'll write the contract. Is that correct?
Limited practice officers do it themselves. I filled out my own.
I did not know that. Oh,
Yeah.
how
I
awesome.
made my own,
Yeah,
I did my own
I'm gonna change my narrative.
But if you're not an LPO, you cannot fill out those forms. So that would be the case where, and I don't know if a lot of title companies use in-house counsel to prepare those. What they will do is they charge the parties to go and have an attorney prepare the
Mhm.
documents. So it's gonna be an additional charge to your people. Now, there are some title companies that even though they have LPOs on staff, may not allow them to prepare them.
To do
So
that.
wait, that's what for doing any research is you might, for using someone, you may want to ask them, if they're doing, the private documents, are you guys are outsourcing those or do you do them in-house?
So
And that would save your people money if they do them in-house versus outsourcing.
are you still licensed in that? Can
I'm
you fill those
licensed,
for us?
I'm licensed, but I don't believe I have the capacity to do it unless, I'm not under an umbrella right at the moment.
Okay.
So I wouldn't be wanting to do it until I did some research and maybe found out, and Russ and I had talked about it, if that was a possible thing, but it may be a conflict of interest, so I haven't totally delved into that to find out, but
Okay.
it may be a thing, but I don't think it is. I think I need to keep them separate.
If they want to change any of the terms in our written forms, they need to go to an attorney. One of them needs to initiate it and then the other one has to approve it. And so that's why we have these approved by Washington State. And so these are the ones that we work with. If we don't, then they need to go to an attorney. This just puts in like your attorney review.
And by the way, a lot of attorneys do prepare their own documents for their clients, so escrow will take outside documents of any kind. It doesn't have to be the LPB form, so people who buy and sell real estate a lot tend to have their own attorneys draft their own documents. And that shouldn't alarm anyone, I don't think. I mean, escrow will take them. They're not preparing them, so they're just taking them into escrow. They're not preparing them or having anything to do with that, so. A lot of times you might find that your client wants to use their own attorney, and that's the thing, if the other party is willing to buy.
And heaven forbid your client is an attorney.
Right, yeah, that's true.
I took a listing agreement to an attorney in Chelan, and he's since become a really great friend. And I went back in after I dropped it off, and this is what he marked through it and he rewrote paragraphs. And I just said, I have a very limited scope. These are the only documents I can work off of. I'm sorry. I thought we could help you sell your mother-in-law's property, but we're not the brokers. And he called Russ to gripe and complain because I wasn't very accommodating. And since then, we've worked together really closely for probably almost 10 years now. So if you need a good attorney, a real estate attorney in town, I can give you a good recommendation. Okay, so payments and method this should always, as much as you can, this is the part we fill out. The promissory note and the contract are blank, and all we do is initial them. And I found out, Kara, on that 22M, you went ahead and filled it out. We didn't need to do that because it was all part of this.
Okay.
All the information was the same. As a matter of fact, they said, do not fill it out.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know. So I was no help there.
When would you fill
Huh?
it? When would you? fill it?
You wouldn't, and I'll show you. As a matter of fact, let me just see.
It's in our transaction forms. And
Yes.
Library.
It's a Northwest MLS form.
Mhm.
And if you look at it, right up here, it says LPB 28A, a promissory note.
Mhm.
So it's basically the same. And I'm going to give you a tip. Here is this form has a manual. So I read that, and we're going to go back over it. But according to this is the only thing that is happening, is you just initial it, the buyer and the seller. And the rest of it is all filled in by your escrow officer that is allowed to do that.
Yeah, in no way should you guys as agents be filling out anything. That's why you have the form that's asking each item what it's going to be, so that you don't have to get involved with touching that form and because that's practicing law. If you complete that note. Let's say they say, well, I want you to fill out the note like I want the money to come. You're like, no, we instruct escrow how to prepare the document. Yeah.
So for many of you, you've seen this. You bring forward what the earnest money is off of the first page of your purchase and sale agreement, whatever additional money, and then the total down payment. It's really important that you not confuse that or not leave one, the earnest money out, because that's part of it. And then the interest rate, what it's going to be, that's fairly simple. We just put the number in there. If it's right now on bankrate.com, they have 7.5%. Of course, if you go to a lender, there are ways you can buy that down. In here, when it talks about the interest rate, interest will begin to occur. I've never not checked anything but on closing. I don't know, maybe you have a special arrangement that it starts January 1 or something like that. I mean, it's just, that's all I've ever checked. And over here it says if nothing is checked or there's no other date, then it's on closing. Okay, so one of these are what you would need to fill out. And so your payments to the seller, they could just be carrying it and just accruing interest. So that's no installment payments are required. They can do number II is principal and interest installments. And this is where you go back to that bankrate.com, and that's where you fill in that amount, where you find that amount, or interest only payments on the outstanding principal balance. So you have to figure out what is it. Typically it's II, principal and interest. The installment payments, if any, shall begin on, and when you use like Evergreen Note Service or People's Bank doesn't do that anymore. There's another one that's used a lot in this area. Please allow time for them to be able to get the documents and get that system set up. So if we have a closing of October 30th, if that's even a date, yeah, October would be 30. So let's say we have that as a closing date. When would you want the first payment here? A general rule of thumb. If it's almost November 1st, when do you want the first payment? Either just Yes, either December or even put it out into January. I like to go 45 to 60 days to allow that company to have plenty of time to set up the records. Wheatland Bank, do they still do that? Not
No, they
anymore.
sold to, and I think it's Northwest Contract Services or something, and I think they're out of like, they're up north and west somewhere, you know, but, they took over Wheatland's. and
Oh,
stuff.
okay,
So there is another option besides Evergreen, but.
yeah.
People's Bank still does it, they do ours.
Oh, do they?
Are you talking about the collection?
Yes.
I was filling out
Apparently WFG does collections themselves.
Really?
December.
Which
Wow.
I was totally surprised by, for, yeah,
Yeah,
Okanagan County.
for Okanagan
For
County.
Okanagan, they do that.
Crazy.
Yeah.
But Peoples doesn't hold the documents. They won't hold documents, the actual originals.
And what is the difference?
They didn't
between
before.
that
Are
always-
they holding yours? Yeah. Oh, they changed it then, because like 6 months ago, they wouldn't even hold it.
Yeah, they told us. A year ago.
So does everybody understand when Vanessa says hold the documents?
No, no. I always get it confused and I forget all the things. So, yeah, what's the benefit or the negative and why does it matter? I guess.
The sellers lose documents, number one.
Oh, the seller would be, oh, yeah, no, we want those held on.
If it's not going to contract collection, they're going to the seller. And a lot of sellers
Yeah.
are unaware of the significance of these documents, as I'm sure you guys know. They don't understand any of that.
There
So
was
they
a,
will tend to lose them.
there was
So-
a time back in, you know, when this shows you how old I am. The savings banks all went defunct, where people would say, okay, so where are the documents? And they sold and changed banks so many times that people that had hundreds of thousands of dollars owing on their mortgage would say, okay, I want to see the documents. No documents. Yeah,
So and the other thing is that you want to make sure what you do, whether it's a note and deed of trust or a real estate contract, is get the actual fulfillment deed signed and notarized at closing, or have the request for reconveyance signed by the sellers to forward with the documents to contract collection. And the reason for this is a lot of times one person will die or both, and then you're having to find signatures for reconveyance for people who don't exist, and that's done all the time, but I mean, it's a longer process, so it just makes things more complicated. It's just easier upfront to get all that stuff, send it, and like you say, if you've done them, you know that that's what you do when you do yours, is that documents are signed ahead of time and held. Yeah.
so how important is your escrow officer? Like mega? Yes. And if you don't have those conversations with your escrow officer, you need to on a seller finance. You need to understand everything so that your client is protected. Okay. Then this is just filling it out, those payments, etc. Now, if you are doing a promissory note and deed of trust, you only fill out D. I can't tell you, almost 80% of the time I'll see a seller finance and they'll come down here and they'll fill this out, but it's a real estate contract. If you do D, you do not do E. If you do E, you don't do D. So if there's any way that you can kind of imprint that, I suggest not tattooing it on your forehead. Anyways, so if you do a promissory note and deed of trust, this is where that other form came in that, and it was so interesting. Kara, Lois had one like 2 days after you and Lauren had one. And she goes, I didn't even know we had this. And I said, well, I didn't either. And so according to the manual, you use this promissory note form when the seller is providing some of the financial and retaining a security interest in the property. So explain what you were buying in yours, yes. And that's more important.
answer.
Okay, So it says to use Form 22M when the seller is providing some of the financing and retaining a security interest in the property. So what type of property were you buying?
Townhouse.
A townhouse?
Yeah, and it was free and clear. He had no mortgage on it, of course. But our names were going on title, not his.
Okay. And so the promissory note then is for the balance, because you had a significant down payment. And if you use that, and then it talks about you can interchange that with the 28A, the LPO
Yes.
28A.
Yes, so we included the 22M, it's a promissory note, because we had been told if you do not have that mutual at the time of
Mhm.
offer and agreement, then it's not enforceable.
It's very, yeah.
So that's
okay.
why I included 22M.
So in your seller financing, have I ever said to any of you, where's Form 28A or 22A? Or if I said, where's Form 44, which are the LPO forms? Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason for that is we need the blank forms for the buyer and the seller to agree. This is the documentation that our escrow officer is going to create into a contract for us. And if the promissory note is not included with the contract, then it's very hard to enforce it. So it all needs to be together. So promissory note and deed of trust either need to be like on right here. It needs to be on line 58. You need to have that. So they need to sign that. Or you can use this 22M.
They're the same, I think they're the same one. Yeah.
Mhm. And whichever one you want to use. I had just never seen it before. I thought that was awesome. And then here, Vanessa, when we talk about the deed of trust securing the property or due on sale and due date securing the property, the majority of time, we've always used 22A.
I would recommend that because the 22 is not going to it's not going to have the language in there for due on sale and due date. It's just going to be an open-ended deed of trust. Just a generic open-ended deed of trust.
Which one?
The Form 22, which just the deed of
Right
trust,
here.
does not include the 22A language about due on sale and due date. So if there's a balloon payment, you have to use Form 22A.
Whoops, if I could spell.
And almost all of them have some kind of a balloon payment anymore. I very rarely do you ever see the Form 22 used. But a lot of times they'll check that box. Yeah. Because they don't know the difference.
Yes. And that's important. And remember, seller financing, if you're a broker under 2 years, then you need to involve Russ. Okay. See, the 22, just the Form 22 does not include the language due on sale. What that means is in the 22A, if I own the property and I sell it to you and I use a promissory note and deed of trust, I'm going to use A or as a seller, because if you decide after a year and a half you want to sell it, then my name is there first. I have to be paid off.
Somebody who doesn't care if they get paid off, if somebody's looking for income and not looking for chunks of money, might use 22 because they might not care. The seller might not care, but usually they care when they're getting their money.
I would think so. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to include that comment on the notes when I send them out. All right. Now I don't know how to get out of this. Okay, that's all right. The balance and principal accrued interest shall be due and payable in full on, this is your balloon payment day. can be 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 30 years. I mean, it just really depends on the type of structure that you build this around. And then the penalties for being late. As I said, buyer may prepay all or part of the balance owed under this agreement at any time without penalty. And that's really important for a seller to know that, because they may look at 5 years. I know every month I'm going to get a $1,200 payment. And my taxes, that works out really well. Well, a year and a half into it, they get a big chunk. It's really important that you make sure that the seller and the buyer know that. We talked about this one. Oh no, this is not the one we talked about. No further encumbrances. If typically on land, we always check this one. And that you don't want people to do, to build, to destroy their property or whatever without consent. You can't take a loan out against it, that type of thing.
Well, it doesn't mean no further encumbrances as a not at all. It just means you have to have the seller's authorization to do them.
Okay. Now, a real estate contract does not require a promissory note. And if you fill this section out and you check that one, then you have to find, typically C is usually checked. And that is protection for the seller, that if the buyer wants to sell it, then they'll have to, you're paid off first as the seller. Somebody else wants it. The entire balance of the principal and interest shall be due on, and this is where you put that balloon payment date. Okay. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I have to tell you that the manuals for the forms are just a wonderful resource. And if you run into any of these and you have and we may come into these where people have had the home for 3 or 4 years and they have a great interest rate. And so they want to buy the equity and then pay off the amount of principal that the seller has paid. That is something that we may see. Assumed seller wrapping the loan. If you get into those, you get with somebody that really knows what they're talking about. Okay.
And I heard that VA loans can be assumed easier, VA to VA.
Isn't that a special document rather than a 22C?
I don't know. I've just heard that if you have a VA loan, you can sell to another veteran and do assumable loans easier than conventional.
They have to apply with VA and be approved.
Okay, yes, yeah.
I gotta do things for West, so I'm gonna hope to stay for the whole.
All right, thank you, Vanessa. Isn't that great to have her as a resource? We are so fortunate. And we are so fortunate. Lois is applying for the team leader role. Oh my God, look at the leadership team. We've got Kelly as the director of operations. We've got Sydney and Ashley, and I'm excited.
And you.
Yeah. All right. So here is the information about the collection account. And I recommend that you just work with your escrow person who they really like. And if you've heard another collection agency is doing a really good job, then let them know, because they want to work with people that are good. Okay, so that is the 22C. Yes, Aaron.
I have a quick question on the platform. Now, let's say that, we came to an agreement on the solar financing portion of it, and this is on the mutual, and afterwards, a week later, we're trying to, like we just discussed, trying to change the amortized time for a longer period. Do I need, what I've seen is that an addendum is enough. Is that?
You mean like a Form 34?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so the question was, okay, so we got mutual and now we want to change it to amortized. Then what you would do is you would reference this document and then you would go back to that section right here and you would reference, the interest rate isn't going to change, but the principal and interest installment is going to change. And then you would reference page 2 of 4, item 2, payments to seller, item C, payments to seller, and then change the 2 I's, principal and interest installments of change to read, and then whatever the new monthly payment is. And then you can change it there.
Okay, and by changing the number, I don't need to specify what is the amount of years. That already says.
That,
Yeah.
yeah, we don't do that now anyways, because that's how we get that payment.
Okay.
So what we specify is interest, what the payment is gonna be, how long of a balloon payment. And then what it's amortized over just determines what that monthly payment is going to be. Yeah. Okay, so I just want to show you one thing on this other form. Maybe I've already pulled it up. Okay. So like your 22C where it says use form 28A, you would literally attach this to your contract behind your form 22C. If you don't know how to do that, I can help you, but Ashley can really show you how to move that up in all the documents. And the only thing they do is initial and initial. Let me just make sure I get the right names, the initial of the buyer and the seller. The buyer and the seller should initial at the bottom of the promissory note to acknowledge that this is part of the purchase and sale agreement. You do not need to fill in any of the forms. Matter of fact, Vanessa said you shouldn't. That's practicing law. So now we know that. And this form is very, very similar to the other one. It is just, let me see. Has a little bit more information on it, but anyways, do you see this little note right here? Do not destroy this note. When paid, this original note, together with the deed of trust securing the same, must be surrendered to the trustee for cancellation and retention before any reconveyance can be processed. So before you can take title, I mean, as a buyer, I mean, complete, and you own it free and clear. So any of these documents it's so important that your buyer and seller make sure that they keep them. I went a little bit over. I hope that was helpful. Any questions, Sarah?
No, thank you, Marsha.
All righty. That is it. Thank you very much. And I'll send out all these documents that I've been showing, and then I'll put in the email the address for the LPO documents, and then also bankrate.com.
Thank you.
All right. You're welcome. You're welcome.
And Marsha, I'm setting up a little like shelf in the back where if you have any extra like little guides that you print out, we can just put all the contracts class stuff, little